All right, Ecclesiastes. So, recap from last week, we finished up chapter 7 and then covered all of chapter 8. We talked about how Kohelet and his quest to explore and uncover wisdom and talk about how things work in the world. He discovers that, you know what, things don't always work out the way that we think it should. And so the way we think that the world should work, the wise and the righteous producing 100% guaranteed blessings, isn't oftentimes the way the world works, because the world that we're living in is fallen. And so in chapter 8, verse 15, Kohelet says, yet even though all of these things are true and we can't achieve all the benefits that we want in a guaranteed fashion, still he says, I counsel joy. Yes, there are frustrations, and our hearts will be grieved, but what can go with us, we talked about joy is that companion that can go with us in the midst of all of these things. And then we wrapped up the section 8, 16, and 17, and said, hey, in spite of, or even because we don't have God's perspective beyond the sun, this is why the best response is joy. And actually, these verses really hinge us really well into our section today. Megan, would you be willing to read these verses for us?
Yeah. When I applied my heart to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how neither day nor night do one's eyes see sleep, then I saw all the work of God, that man cannot find out the work that is done under the sun. However much man may toil in seeking, he will not find it out. Even though a wise man claims to know, he cannot find it out. And then chapter 9 says,
Oh, no.
Okay. Doesn't say that.
It doesn't say, oh no. But we're going to keep reading. We're just going to pretend like the screen is not doing crazy stuff.
But all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him.
Thanks, Megan.
Is this love or hate?
This is absolutely hate. So you can see how Kohelet really is continuing on a similar line of thought. There's the repetition of this idea of search, of examination. There's also a repetition of the word know, which we will see emphasized in the next section.
Are there other things that are repeated?
Yes, there's this idea of wisdom. You'll see in the... You see the word wisdom repeated? Lord. Just keep it there. And we also have this repetition of God, that God is emphasized in these verses. And I think that Kohelet is really recognizing the hand of God in this section. And this, I think, becomes important in figuring out what's going on in verse 1. Which does say, but all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. And then just sliding in, I'm going to move to the next slide. But whether it's love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. That word but is that word kai, ki, whatever. That it has all of those various possible meanings, and sometimes the word goes the one way, and then sometimes it goes the other way. And the translators basically interpret based on which way they think the verse is flowing. I think it's probably better to either translate it here as causative, to sort of say, so, all this I laid to heart, or as like an accentuation, like indeed. Indeed, all of this I laid to heart.
And the it all refers to the results of his search, so the limited benefits that we find from wisdom and righteousness. But it also begs the question, what does it mean to be in the hand of God? Certainly Kohelet seems to be implying that this is a privilege or benefit of the wise and the righteous, because it's just those that he's focusing on. But what do we mean when we pray that something or someone would be in God's hands?
This is a real question, not a rhetorical question.
That's like protection or healing.
Protection or healing, okay.
I think of like whenever someone is, say, really struggling towards the end with a disease, and you think, okay, in your hands, Lord. So if you want to miraculously heal them, do it. If you want to take them home, do it. And we often pray, please let them not suffer for another 5 months.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so there's definitely this idea of like it's like giving God control, like the Jesus take the wheel kind of feel to it, right?
Yeah.
Where we're acknowledging what's always true, which is God's the one in control and we're not. The next line, whether it is love or hate, man does not know. Both are before him. Makes us think of chapter 7, verses 13 to 14. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? In the day of prosperity, be joyful, and in the day of adversity, consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. We are not sovereign, which we know, sort of, and we're not the masters of our destiny.
Yep. And I think so. Some people take a look at love or hate, and they interpret it in sort of a man's perspective. So you don't know if you're gonna walk out and encounter somebody, a relationship, and you're gonna be like, my best buddy, or if you're gonna be like, oh no, I encountered, some negative vibes here. We do think that I think that in view of what's going on in the entire passage, that God's perspective is in view here. That we can view it more as divine favor, whether or not God will look upon us with favor. And one of the, I think, best examples that is, maybe not best examples, one of the maybe a humorous example that happened last year, I am in fact going to share again. Last year, my mom, now she does this more than just last year, but they went to Lancaster Cupcake, and my mom was like, hey, do you guys want cupcakes? Because we're going, and I was like, of course I want a cupcake from Lancaster Cupcake. What do I look like? And so you go on the website and you look at all of the flavors that are available, right? And I saw the Black Forest Cherry Blossom cupcake, and you can't really see the colors because it's distorted, but it is just the most delectable looking cupcake I have ever seen in my life. And I said, oh my goodness, I would love a Black Forest Cherry cupcake. And so a couple of hours later, my mom reaches back out. She's like, hey, I went to order the cupcakes. And they're out of the Black Forest Cherry cupcakes. And I was like, being a naturally dramatic person, I don't know if you guys picked up on that. I responded, all caps, the Lord hates me. Lord, I know I'm teaching on how I don't know whether love or hate was before me. I just wasn't expecting it this soon. Now, a couple of hours later, mom reaches back out and is like, oh, I went to actually place the order and it changed. It turns out it's back in stock.
Even better.
Again, all caps. The Lord hath redeemed mine sorrow. Love was before me. And I then proceeded to rage in all caps and how it would be perfect for Sunday's lesson. And so that's my example.
Mm-hmm. So it's not literal love or hate.
No.
God isn't loving or hating us.
No.
It's favor, success,
favor.
or maybe a lack of success.
Yeah.
So both, the word is literally all.
Mm-hmm.
The best of blessings and the worst of tragedies and everything in between could be ahead of the author, ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
We see that this verse functions as a hinge, so it closes out the prior section, reminding readers that no matter how wise or righteous we are, we cannot predict our own future. I like to think of 8:17 as a caution: do not be wise in your own eyes, and claim to know what you do not know.
Yeah.
And we can't know what destiny lies ahead of us. The only thing we know for sure
Is that we're gonna
something's coming. Yeah, death and taxes.
Dang it,
Two faithfuls.
I don't like that. Right?
There's
Look,
still taxes.
get rid of all of the taxes. So that is the hinge verse there. So we're gonna keep rolling. Verse 2 and 3 is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and to the wicked, to the good and the evil, the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who does not sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. This is an evil and all that is done under the sun, but the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that they go to the dead. First of all, I do have to address the fact that I highlighted in blue, it is, which is the same color coding that I've been using for Hebel. because some of the ancient versions of the text, the LXX and one of the other manuscripts, do actually have Hevel there, so it's vapor. Vapor is the same for all, which I think does provide a little bit of a smoother reading. We are going to come back to this idea. Next, we're drawing our attention to, we have a lovely little chiasm here. We have 6 sets of kinds of people, good and bad. Megan.
So many chiasms. The center of the chiasm, clean and sacrifice. So here, in the middle. Describe a particular kind of righteousness. What kind of righteousness do you think of when you think of clean and sacrifice in the Bible? Jesus makes us clean by his sacrifice, for sure. But how about before?
Old Testament, good.
Old Testament sacrifice, like ceremonial cleanness. And so, can you be ceremonially righteous, that was our word, and rotten to the core?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
you could do all the things. We've talked about this. Do all the right things and still inside be faithless. So we see this in the New Testament, also in Matthew 23, when Jesus addresses the Pharisees, and he calls them, it's all the woe statements for the Pharisees. He calls them whitewashed tombs because on the outside they are clean, but inwardly they're full of dead man's bones. And they are unclean. And this contrasts with true humility. Christ points a contrast to humility. Those who humble themselves will be exalted. The next layer of the chiasm is almost exactly the same, with the exception of the fact that the word evil is crossed out.
And this is because in some of the manuscripts, that word actually isn't there. So it's been probably dropped, like it was probably a scribal error. The word evil is only 2 characters in Hebrew. It's I can't say it. You know, but it was close. So it's very possible that it was scribal error. I think probably that it's the intended meaning is the same regardless. So I think that it's probably best to leave and the evil in. But that pair more reflects, okay, this is what's really going on in your heart and what you then express by your actions. But I think that the outer layer is the most interesting because on the one hand we have righteous and wicked, which kind of themes with good and evil, and as the good one is, so is the sinner. Like those all seem to be similar. And then at the end we have the one who swears as he who shuns an oath, and it's I think even more especially interesting because you have in the pairing you have the good thing first, and then the bad thing, right? Righteous, wicked, the clean, unclean, sacrifice, don't sacrifice. But then we've already heard, cast your minds back to chapter 5 verses 1 through 7. From Kohelet's perspective, is swearing an oath a good thing? Necessarily? He was like, okay, but he's not telling us definitely don't swear or definitely do swear. But what did he say? He said, if you're going to, you better
Do it.
You better do it, right? And so he's almost saying, okay, well, it's actually probably better if you just don't, just don't make those crazy oaths and just go about your life there. And so it seems that the order is switched. It's you either have a scribal error or you have the author trying to draw our attention to that spot. It's possible that making a vow would be significant because it's that sort of that extra outer layer of visible devotion. And so making vows can make you look righteous before others, but the person who isn't making those visible overtures may actually be doing so because they're rightly fearful before God. And so he's sort of like playing those around with those here.
So it paints the picture of like this outwardly clean versus sincere righteousness.
Right. And so no matter how truly righteous or surface righteous and pretend righteous you are, it doesn't actually matter. Death comes to all.
Yeah, and if I may, it makes me think also of chapter 8, verse 10, when Kohelet talks about the wicked going in and out of holy places. They're appearing holy, and they're praised in the city in which they do those things. But it also seems like in Matthew, Jesus is saying that the outwardly righteous, inwardly wicked person is living in and dwelt by sort of death already.
Right. Yeah. It's a great connection, Megan. And in this whole section, Kohelet sort of concludes, and again, or even front loads the section by saying this is Hebel, and then he concludes by saying that this is evil. And so, why does he say this? Well, let's look at the second half of verse 3. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live, and after that, they go to the dead. I think the first thing to highlight is that this parallels verse 1, which describes the wise and the righteous in their deeds, so we can use verse 1 to help us sort of interpret verse 3. Second, so the Hebrew at the end of this verse is literally, and afterwards to death. It's sort of like this like marching command thing, and it's very abrupt. It's a very sudden conclusion to the matter.
Yeah, so and then at either end of the chiasm, he's pointing back to death being this leveler for all of us.
Mhm.
We all die.
Right.
And so righteousness and wisdom have very little benefit, if any,
Mm-hmm.
because the righteous and the wise die just like the wicked. And they can't predict what will happen.
Mm-hmm.
So in thinking about this, we were reminded of this beautiful woman, Melody Landis, who I referred to a few weeks ago. And her death was just so, she died from complications of tumor removal in her brain. And just this tragic thing of this woman who was young and wise and a mother, and doing all of the things that we all seek to do. You know, she was trying to raise her kids with wisdom, and she was trying to live a righteous life. And in her obituary, it says Melody was a loving wife and mother, homeschool teacher, and worshiper of the Lord Jesus Christ. She was a member of New Beginnings Fellowship, where she taught in the children's ministry, and she was also an active member of Heritage Co-op with her children. She loved singing, especially with her children, loved being active outdoors. In God's creation, was a creative decorator, good writer. She loved to travel. She also relished family vacations, spending quality time with her family at home. Loved the many gatherings with parents and siblings and time with friends.
And I think whenever we hear of the sudden deaths, where somebody who is so, and again, not just an outward, okay, well, she looked pretty from, and her life looked clean from the outside, but somebody who was really striving to follow the Lord, somebody who really loved her family. And we're like, oh, God, why? We want answers. We want to say, God, like, this seems unjust. Why? We know that we all die, but especially for somebody to die so young. And we don't really have, at least on this side of eternity, we don't have those answers. And so Kohelet declares, this is Hebel, this is evil. And so what's the impact, Kohelet is going to say, on impending death for all of those whose hearts are bent on wickedness? And this is, again, the second half of the verse here. The evil people figure, well, we might die tomorrow, we might not. We may as well live it up to the most perverted evil and delusion as we can. March 27th, 2023, Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee was targeted by a mass shooter. Three teachers, 3 students were gunned down. The woman who had perpetrated it had kept over 20 journals. The final page in her journal is titled Death Day. There's a picture of a gun. She writes, "Today is the day. The day has finally come. I'm a little nervous, but excited too. Been excited for the past 2 weeks. Can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm ready. I hope my victims aren't. It's gonna go quick. I hope I have a high death count. Ready to die, haha." And that attitude is pervasive amongst not only mass shooters, but the many evildoers of today.
It's hard, to even comprehend. For me, reading that, to just, even wrap my head around that kind of wickedness and darkness, madness, is, I can't.
It's stunning.
Yeah.
And even, I can't stop thinking, too, about the situation over in Israel with Hamas and the terrorist organization and how they've recorded themselves taking those hostages. The one man who was recently released, whenever they released him, they had him read some statement and then talk to the cameras saying how excited he was to go and see his wife and his children. And they laughed because they had killed him a year earlier, not told him. So he was released only to find that they were already dead and had been dead for a year. And you're like, oh, that is evil. The hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. And afterward, they too go to the dead. And this is Kohelet's lament. Now we have to pause, and we do have to say that what Kohelet isn't saying is that, hey, there's blanket treatment in the afterlife. That's not what's in view here. In a few weeks, we're going to see how thoroughly Kohelet will counsel us to live in healthy fear of that future judgment. But instead, remember the emphasis is under the sun. He's observing the frustration and the angst and all of the raging at the sky. All those feelings that we have from the nature of death. It comes to all, regardless of whether they are righteous or wicked. This is hell.
But he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward. For the memory of them is forgotten, their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun.
So the Hebrew of the first line is a little bit weird. The word for joined is actually choose. Some translators have suggested an alternate reading, which is very different, and it's who is the one who chooses? The living has hope, which is a little bit weird, but it meaning, so God is the only one who makes those ultimate life and death choices, not mere mortals. So this line would actually then belong better with the end of the chiasm, saying, hey, God is the only one who has those decisions. It's an intriguing possibility. We're going to continue with the interpretation basically as it's written in the ESV, but I can't help it. I have to share. So intriguing possibility. So either way, the next line is the same.
Okay, so if you're alive, there's hope.
There is hope.
The next line is probably a proverb from Kohelet's day. Dogs in ancient Israel were not beloved like dogs of today. And I did a little reading about this, and I was like, oh, well, in all of the ancient world, dogs were probably like despised. Turns out they weren't. In lots of places, like in Egypt, they were like esteemed.
Yeah.
But in Israel, they were for sure not esteemed, and they were a sign of like contempt.
Right.
They were despised.
And I think it's hard for us to grasp because in our day we have really lovely dogs. Like this is just, I love this picture of not my dog Misty, but my mom's dog Mina with one of my nephews. Which one? Don't ask me that. They are twins. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't ask me. Shh.
Grandma knows.
Yeah, Grandma knows. Whatever. But because look at that. She's so nice. She's so pleasant and sweet, and you're like, oh, Mina. But that's not the picture that we should have when we read these verses. That's not. No.
That's not what's in view.
Oh.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So nasty.
So these are more along the lines, right, of what Kohelet was thinking. They're a little scary. You probably wouldn't want to put your child next to him.
No.
There were scavengers, like in the story of Jezebel, when she falls out of the window. What do the dogs do? They take it away. Yeah, they take her away. Only her skull and her hands were left. So dogs were lowly and contemptible in ancient Israel, at least. Lions, though, by contrast, were respected. They represented strength and beauty and courage.
The
But
lion is sleeping, not dead in this picture. I couldn't
thought
break
it
my
wasn't a
heart.
lion.
I couldn't break my heart and find a picture. I was like, no, that just a snapping lion. But
Once the moment the lion dies, all of the strength
mm-hmm.
and beauty and courage die with the lion.
Right.
And so the living dog, who might be mangy and have no honor, is better than a dead lion because at least the dog is alive.
Right. And so as we consider the meaning of the verses, at first you have this impulse of, okay, well, there's hope, right? If you're alive, even if you're a mangy scavenger dog, you have hope because you're better off than the dead lion, right?
Hope is good.
Right. Hope is good. However, we're gonna put a pin on hope because whenever things are going south, right, you usually do offer people words of hope, right? You offer them some nice things.
So on Friday night, went to see my oldest godson. I have 3 godsons, who I love dearly. But the oldest one was in a play in Anastasia, and we went to see him in his high school. Like, he's in middle school. Anyway, and it was great. We loved it. It was so good. But if it had been bad, at the end, I probably would have said something along the lines of, "It's okay, you have tomorrow, and we'll hope that it goes better than it did today."
Right. Or if you go through like a breakup or something, you're like, okay, don't worry, there are more fish in the sea. You've got more opportunities out there, right?
Better luck next time.
That's right.
Hopefully. So the object of our hopeful statements is usually positive. But what does Kohelet say is the reason that the living have hope? What sets them apart from the dead?
At least you know you're gonna be dead someday, and you're like, what? That seems like a really weird thing for Kohelet to say. You know what? No matter how crummy your life is, at least you're alive to know that death is coming. What? Once you're dead, well, you're done, and that's it. Now, I don't think that, again, Kohelet is saying that there's soul sleep. He's not looking toward what happens after we die. He's just saying, hey, under the sun, we're just thinking about, okay, once you're done, you don't know what's going on because you're here now. Now there is some great wordplay that's visible and hearable only in Hebrew. The words for reward, forgotten, and memory all sound similar whenever you say them aloud. Can I speak Hebrew? No. So am I going to try? No. But if you look at the Hebrew characters as well, they're very close and they're only off by just a very little bit. And so you can see reward and then forgotten and memory. So they're all very, very close. Again, the transliteration is not, this is not, so the Hebrew don't read that, but that's sort of close to how we would sound those words out. And so in verse 5, Kohelet also says the dead have no more reward. This word reward is usually something used of something accomplished through effort. And what Kohelet will say is that, hey, there is no more effort whenever you die. Yeah.
And we know that he believes in God's divine judgment after death.
Mm-hmm.
But his view here, we are reminded, is also just under the sun.
Right.
This is his perspective. Right. And contrasts between the living who are still alive and the dead who are already dead.
Right. Now, I'm going to posit as well that, so in verse 5, the conjunction that's used in verse 5 for the memory of them is forgotten. I think that it's better, so it's that word kai again. I think that and is better, so it's not more for the memory of them is forgotten, but it's like an additional quality of the dead and the memory of them is forgotten.
And most people, after they die, are not remembered.
Right.
I was listening to a sermon on Ecclesiastes, and he was like, I would challenge you to think of your great-great-grandparents' names. Do you remember them? Do you even know their first names? And I tried to do this, and the answer was no, not really. I knew their last names, and I knew, baby names and stuff, but most people aren't remembered.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we aim to live wisely and righteously and leave behind us this good legacy for our children, we are also forgotten along with the wicked. And I think it's especially poignant because we were talking that even when we try to remember a person, we don't really do it very well, and we end up forgetting and getting caught up in our lives, and that is foul.
Yeah. And Megan, I remember when we were talking, you were talking about your Alex's grandfather, right?
Yes.
Alex's grandfather.
Mm-hmm.
You were like nodding. I'm like, oh no.
It was. I was like, well,
And she was talking about how they had saved this chest that he had given them, and it was to remind them, and then it was starting to get broken down, and I was like, we should just throw it away, and then he's like, no, we should make it into something. And we were talking about how, so if they save that, and they're like, okay, and they managed to even impress upon their kids, and like, hey, how treasured this thing is, and like, okay, well, but they're gonna grow up, and then they're gonna like try to tell their kids, and they're like, I've never met these people. Like
it has no meaning.
It doesn't even so fast. That meaning is lost. That memory is just, and you're like, it's so pebbled. Wow. Now there is, I have to point it out, just one more rhyme in Hebrew with love, hate, and envy. There's nothing significant about it. I had to point it out, I'm sorry. But I do think that it's interesting. So all of these things, love, hate, and envy, are some of the most powerful emotions that a person can feel. Even those most powerful of emotions that we can possess toward one another fade away once they're dead and buried. They're just gone. Whether it's we ourselves have died, or even if you think about somebody and you really any of the things, even love. Like once a person, if somebody in your life dies, yes, you still love them, but the emotions fade over time. And I think that's even more true, I would hope, for hate and envy. Like if you had the really strong resentment towards somebody, I've heard testimony of people saying, well, people then they died, and what happens to that bitterness and that envy? It's broken, it's gone, and that those emotions just fade away.
The word for share is the word helek, which you'll remember is lot, or lot in life. When you're dead, your activity under the sun ceases. So God gives us our helek, He gives us our deck of cards while we're living, but you relinquish the helek when you die, once you enter the grave. You drop your deck of cards.
Right. And so the time to act is, in fact, now. As we discussed in chapter 7, the knowledge that death is coming is really important. It enables us to make the most of our time among the living. Remember at the beginning of the second half of Ecclesiastes, back in chapter 6, Kohelet had asked the question, for who knows what is good, what is tov, for man while he lives the few days of his Hebel life, which he passes like a shadow. And now he's answering that question. He started in 8:15, commending joy, and now he is really going to go to town. Megan, would you read our next Enjoy Life refrain for us?
Yeah, so go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. Let your garments be always white, let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love all the days of your Hebel life that He has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life. And in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or thought or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol to which you are going.
We do have here a super intensification of that Enjoy Life theme. This is our 6th Enjoy Life refrain, and Kohelet has moved now from descriptions to commendations, and now these are actually commands. He's saying, you go and do these things. Before he had told us, hey, just eat, drink, and take pleasure, take joy. And now each verb from these basic undertakings, these staples of life, is intensified.
Right, so he's saying, eat your bread. And for those people who are gluten-free, I'm very, very sorry.
It's
so sad. But who doesn't love a warm baked loaf of bread, fresh out of the oven?
It's delicious.
Or like when you're really hungry and you get seated at the restaurant,
And they're like,
and the bread plate comes.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
This is a moment of joy, right? And everybody goes in and like, where's the next plate?
on. That's right. That's right. And even so bread. So I think about bread as like a luxury item. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm gonna enjoy a loaf of bread. But in these days, bread was what? It was a staple. The grain was like the heartbeat of their existence. And as we move on to the next one, drinking wine, before, so that he had said drink and sort of implied was this idea of wine. Now it's directly stated. Alcohol consumption is definitely a tricky topic that's sometimes avoided because people have strong feelings about it. But in biblical times, wine was also what? A staple. It was another staple of life. For one thing, so they didn't have all of the different drinks that we have. Like I have literally right here flavored water because I am a bougie. And I'm like, but did they have that back then?
No.
Did they have coffee? Maybe, but no. So they had wine, water, and then maybe milk, right? Because from their animals, and that was it. And then if you think about the quality of water that they had, so if you had some fresh water at a stream, that was good. Otherwise, they had what? Stale, nasty, stinky, disgusting water. So
Your stomach's that kind of water.
Yeah, gross.
So wine often was the safer drinking option.
Right.
It was also used for medicinal purposes. You think about 1 Timothy 5:3. Paul tells Timothy to drink some wine for his stomach. And then, of course, it's for enjoyment. So we talk about two problems with alcohol consumption, which are drunkenness and addiction, and addiction leading to a whole other host of problems. But provided we avoid those extremes, Scripture does not forbid, and in a number of cases it says, go for it.
Go for it. Now, obviously, we have to stipulate, is Kohelet saying, hey, go get drunk and lay in a puddle and lie in a puddle and, just get passed out? No, that's not what he's saying. But he's saying, hey, these things which are a part of life, enjoy them. Enjoy them. And his rationale is that God approves what we do. And once again, we have a rhyme. The word approve rhymes with the word for enjoy.
So Matthew chapter 7, verse 11 says, if you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? So he's basically saying God's given us good things that we are meant to enjoy. So enjoy them.
Enjoy them. And as we slide into the next verse here, I like the literal Hebrew here. All the time, let your clothes be white and oil on your head. So these images, white clothing and using oil, were symbols of celebration and joy. And they were in contrast with the mourning garb, sackcloth and ashes.
But we're kind of in a little bit of whiplash here, right? Because
A little bit.
Kohelet has spent so much time dwelling on this concept of death. And his previous recommendations were against going to the house of feasting and instead go to the house of mourning because it's better to be there. But once more we see that precise line that Kohelet's trying to get us to walk. So he's like, yes, consider death, consider death, consider death. Now go have fun. But truly there's this sense of urgency, I think, that comes when you're thinking about the imminency of our own death. Then when he says to go enjoy, you're like, it's do it now. It's not wait for when you feel like it.
Right. And I don't know how much this is related, but I'm going to go for it. Last night I was with another couple, and they were talking about not wanting to get a dog because they were like, well, the dog's going to die someday. And I was like,
Better to have loved and lost.
yes, but you could enjoy the dog. Like, I'm like, you could enjoy the dog for like 10, 15 years and have all of that joy. Unless, like, yes, you know that one day the dog's gonna die, and then I am going to be sad and I tell my dog, look, you cannot escape and get hit by a car because I will be devastated. But even that reminder forces me into like that moment of, okay, enjoy now. And talking to Megan about preparing the Genesis study, and I was talking about frustration about I'm writing so slowly, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, yes, but don't forget to take the joy in the preparation of this time. Like, this is the time that you have to prepare the study. I was like, I feel that rebuke to my soul, like right here, right now, like as we're going through.
And I was like, listen,
Listen.
this is fresh in my mind.
And so, like, he really is telling us, hey, in each of these things, the death is coming, and yes, that should make us sober, but also ready to enjoy. Now, the next line here is, I was reminded of Toy Story, because Toy Story, Woody's like, does everybody have a moving buddy? If you don't have one, get one! And that's sort of the feel of verse 9. It's not just, hey, enjoy the life of the wife that you have. The Hebrew actually implies, if you don't have a wife, get one. So he's like, hey, he's even pushing, go and find a wife. And we're not going to develop this a ton, but this refrain is actually paralleled in the Epic of Gilgamesh. How many people are familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh? So it's ancient Mesopotamian myth genre, and in Gilgamesh they have this refrain: when the gods created mankind, death for mankind they set aside, life in their own hands retaining. Thou Gilgamesh, let full be thy belly, make thou merry by day and by night, of each day make thou a feast of rejoicing. Day and night dance thou and play, let thy garments be sparkling fresh, thy head be washed, bathe thou in water. Pay heed to the little one that holds on to thy hand. Let thy spouse delight in thy bosom. For this is the task of mankind. Now, we do know that proverbs were collected and sort of, from other cultures, so it doesn't really terribly throw me that this sort of refrain is in another culture, for all truth is God's truth. But I do think it's really striking how Kohelet takes this poem and he shifts it.
And he talks about, like we discussed before, God's approval and his enjoyment in our enjoyment.
Yep.
And points to that.
Yep. And I do want to highlight here, so he says all the days of your Hebel life, and I do think that this is one of those times whenever you can sort of wrap all of the meanings in here. He's sort of reflecting back and saying, hey, amidst the life that you have that is short, that is fleeting, that is sometimes full of those frustrating moments, that is often so full of that bitterness and that foulness that sometimes can feel like you can't grab onto it, it just doesn't last. He's like, even in the midst of all of this, this is what has been given to you. Remember what Kohelet's goal is.
So first he points us to recognize the heaviness of life. All of these, life is all these things.
Right. And secondly, he wants to guide us away from the negative responses to the heaviness. He's saying, don't dive into folly, don't rely on your righteousness.
And then finally, his goal is to point us toward what's good in life.
Right.
What is best.
Right. And so, cast your mind back to chapter 3. We have this understanding that God has this great plan, right? That he is good, that he is wise, and he is working all of these things together, right? But because God is God, and, well, we're not, we're wretchedly crippled in our ability to figure out what that means for each of our individual lives.
Yeah, and we've kind of swung on the pendulum a little bit, like despair, apathy, pleasure-seeking, all of those things. And Kohelet's discouraging both those extremes. And instead, he's saying the best thing we can do with life and the limitations that we find under the sun is to take hold of your helet and to enjoy it. Take hold of your lot. Not because it's a task, like we saw in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Right. You have to do it, it's your task, but because it's a gift. Life is a gift, and God is the giver.
And so Kohelet balances his refrain here by referring to work. And I do think that the verse makes a little bit more sense if you modify the last part of verse 9 with verse 10 to say, in your toilsome toil under the sun, whatever you find to do, do it with your might. Even in the drudgery of our work, we can seize the opportunity. And why? And of course, today we would say, okay, well, why should we work at something with all our heart? Well, because, we do it for the Lord. And that's certainly true, but that's not Kohelet's focus. Instead, his focus is the only time that you have is now. This is the only moment that you are guaranteed, is right this second. And death is coming, so get a move on. And so, structure, review, we have this reminder that our fate is in God's hands and not ours. And death comes to not just the wicked, nor the righteous only, but to us all. It is that great leveler. In the final verses, we have the sixth, not final, but sixth, enjoy life refrain.
Yeah, and so we're commended to rejoice in God's good gifts. And first we have to recognize, like we said, where our good gifts come from. James 1:17 says, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights. So enjoy them without overindulging and not pursuing them as the end goal, recognizing they're a gift.
Right. But we do want to make the most. Make the most of that deck of cards, right? Before it's too late. Before the time runs out and we don't have any more opportunities under the sun. Today is the day. We're going to stop. All right. Hike your own hike if you desire. You know the deal. Look back at chapter 9. Look forward to the second half of chapter 9 and chapter 10. Thanks for sticking with us today. Moving into prayer.